Hello again and welcome. TPC Mooney 16 here with my fifth edition of March Madness Tips and Bracketology. I love watching and talking college basketball, so it's just great to be back and doing this again. I watched a lot of college basketball this season, probably somewhere around 100 games. And I try to get a sense of as many of these teams throughout the year as I can, form my own opinion, and then I'll supplement that with some of the conference tournaments at the end just to see, which of these mid-major teams I can see pulling off an upset. So just to go over some of the basics, right? So games get underway tomorrow night, so that's Tuesday night with two playing games, and then two more playing games on Wednesday, and then the tournament officially tips off Thursday at 12:15 with the Louisville versus Creighton game. That's an 8-9 matchup. You can see here I set up another bracket pool in the ESPN Tournament Challenge called Mooney Hoops Bracket Pool. And so yeah, go ahead, join the group, fill out a bracket, and we'll see who ends up on top. All right, so that's that. And now let's get into some of these picks. All right, so number one overall seed up in the South region. That's the Auburn Tigers, who I think was deserving of the top pick after the season they had, especially, leading the SEC, which was a historically great conference this year. Um, they've got an elite frontline scorer in Janai Broom, star center. He was the SEC Player of the Year, and I think likely to be the National Player of the Year. And then they have a bunch of guards that can really score, like Miles Kelly, Denver Jones, Chad Baker Mazzara, and then Tahad Pettiford. He's a really good freshman for them. So, they got at least four guards that can really shoot. And then, like I said, Broom, Dylan Cardwell is another big man down low. And they're the number two team in offensive efficiency, and got a top 15 defense. So, you know, although I think being the number one overall seed, I think they got, um, you know, a fairly weak region. Like Michigan State is the two, Iowa State at the three, and then Texas A&M at the four. So I don't see too many challenges for them, but we'll see. So obviously, starting off the 116, taking the Tigers. So moving down, like I said, the tip-off game Thursday afternoon is Louisville versus Creighton. As you can see, 3:20 at 12:15. 8-9 games are always pick-em games. I feel like Louisville was a bit underseeded here, finishing third in the ACC, and they made the ACC tournament final against Duke. They have Terrence Edwards Jr., who was a versatile guard. He transferred over from JMU, who was a upset team last year. They won a game in the tournament. Um, and Creighton, on the other hand, finished second in the Big East, also made their conference final and lost to St. John's. And they're led by Ryan Kalkbrenner, their center, who was actually a four-time Big East Defensive Player of the Year, which is just crazy um, to win that award four times. And then, point guard Ashworth, he's really good. He can really shoot. Um, I think here the difference is Kalkbrenner down low, so I'm going to take the Blue Jays. Moving down, so the 5-12, so that's Michigan versus UC San Diego. And the 5-12 matchups are always tricky because I feel like a lot of the upsets come on this line. And very often people, as they're filling out the brackets, this is kind of where they look to pick some of these upsets. I went back and forth on this one because, on the one hand, a lot of people have been talking about UC San Diego having such a great year, and I think they have the nation's longest winning streak of 15 games coming into this. And I'm actually not that high, or wasn't that high, on Michigan, but they do have two 7-footers in Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf. So Golden, he came over to Michigan with the coach from Florida Atlantic when he took the job, and he's a force down low, and then Wolf, another 7-footer, but he can really handle the ball and initiate offense, especially at that size. Um, and Michigan made a run all the way through the Big Ten tournament and won the championship. And then I watched UC San Diego against UC Irvine in the Big West final, and I don't know. I mean, I was underwhelmed. I guess I think I was expecting a little bit more. So I'm gonna stay with Michigan in this one. No upset yet. Um, Next up, we got Texas A&M versus Yale. Yale was actually in this exact same spot last year, although ironically they played against 4-seeded Auburn, who's now the number 1 overall seed, and they sprung the upset against them. And now it's Texas A&M instead of Auburn. Although ironically, that Auburn team ran through, and I think they won the SEC tournament last year. Meanwhile, Texas A&M, I think I think they lost their first game against Texas, so they had an early exit from the SEC tournament. They do have 2 pretty tough guards that can really score, in Wade Taylor and Zurich Phelps. And it was Texas A&M last year that I mean, they took Houston down to the wire, and I think the game went to like either single or double overtime, and Houston ended up winning. Um, Now Yale, I mean, I feel like they're in this position every year, like a 13 seed. They've only lost 1 of their last 17 games. I think this will be a pretty popular upset pick, especially, again, like I said, Yale did this exact thing this year, but I think Texas A&M turns the tide this year. I think it'll be a close game, but I think Texas A&M has just enough. Um, Ole Miss, and then the winner of San Diego State and North Carolina. Um, Now Ole Miss finished 7th in the SEC, which just goes to show how deep that conference was. Pretty balanced offensively and defensively. They have Sean Padula as a guard that can really score, and then the combination of Jamin Brakefield, who I think was a transfer from Duke, I want to say. And then Matt Morrell, Malik Dia, I mean, really give them some size and length to stretch out the defense. And then the other side of this is, I think, probably the most controversial topic of the bracket from what I've heard, and that's North Carolina getting into the field. When I think a lot of the bracketologists and the gurus, pretty much everybody had them out. But here they are, and they're part of a play-in game against San Diego State, and that game is tomorrow night, I believe. So we'll see. I mean, part of me hopes San Diego State comes out and puts that all to bed, just so we can move on from the North Carolina conversation. But I think this is going to be the first upset for me. I've seen Ole Miss play a little bit, but there's always one of these teams that comes out of Dayton and these play-in games and goes on a run. So I'm going to take the winner of San Diego State, North Carolina. And we got Iowa State versus Lipscomb. So Iowa State is a weird one to me. I've seen them play great this year, and I think they started like 17-1, but they're not healthy. TJ Osselberger, the coach, he came out and said Keyshawn Gilbert, point guard, he's their second leading scorer, I think is out indefinitely. So, he's not going to play, basically. Although Curtis Jones, one of their other guards, had like the game of his life last week in the Big 12 quarterfinal with 31 points. So, I mean, they definitely have some other guys that can score. Now Lipscomb, automatic bid out of the ASUN. They have the ASUN Player of the Year in Jacob Ognjanovic. who averages like 20 points a game. So I think he's obviously the offense, runs through him. But Iowa State, even without Gilbert, still top 20 in offensive and defensive efficiency. So, you know, I think they should get by here. Marquette versus New Mexico. This is another weird one to me because Marquette started off the year like 18-3. I think they were through 21 games, but they finished 23-10. So not great down the stretch. They have Cam Jones, who can really score, averages like 19 points a game, as well as Joplin is a versatile forward. And then on the other hand, New Mexico finished 26-7, first in the Mountain West, which was a conference that got 4 teams into the tournament, led by Donovan Dent. He was the Mountain West Player of the Year, averages almost 21 points a game. And I mean, they had wins over UCLA, VCU earlier this year, also tournament teams. I was pretty high on New Mexico last year after they ran through and won the Mountain West tournament, and then they lost to Clemson in the first round, who ultimately went on to the Elite Eight. My instinct here was Marquette, but I think I'm switching to the Lobos with a little bit of a mini upset here. Take the Lobos. Michigan State and Bryant. So Michigan State, I feel like they're just one of those teams where their talent or like their eye test, when you watch them, just doesn't jump off the page at you. I mean, they're not really that exciting, but they're just so solid at what they do. And Izzo plays like 10 guys. They got 5 guards between Akins, who I think is their leading scorer, Richardson, who's a really good freshman, and then Holloman, Carr, and Fears Jr. They're not the best shooting team, but I think they were number 1 in Big Ten in rebounding and then also in fast break points. So I mean, they pull the boards down and they get out in transition fast. Again, I mean, they don't really wow me, but they're just one of those teams that is built for a tournament like this. So I have a feeling they're going to have some success here. So obviously we're taking them over the 15 seed in the first round. Moving down to the West region, Florida, number 1 seed, got to go from the obviously southeast all the way to the west coast. They made a run the last couple weeks, beating Alabama twice, Tennessee, and Texas A&M, including running through the SEC tournament and winning the championship, which I think solidified their standing as a number 1 seed. I mean, they're just a machine when you watch them. They have 4 really good guards, including Walter Clayton Jr. He was the SEC tournament MVP, as well as Elijah Martin. He was a transfer from Florida Atlantic, and he was on that team that went to the, Florida Atlantic that went to the Final Four. Will Richards, who can really score, and then Denzel Aberdeen comes off the bench. And I mean, call me crazy, but Walter Clayton Jr. reminds me a lot of Kemba Walker. And I mean, he's not quite as fast or athletic, I don't think, but man, can he shoot. And he can really pass the ball too. And then on top of that, they have 4 big men, Chinyelu, Condon, Hauk, and Handlockton, that are all long, versatile. They run the offense to a T. So I'm pretty high on Florida coming into the NCAA tournament. So we'll see how far I have them going, but they'll tip that off with a pretty decisive victory over Norfolk State. Next up, UConn versus Oklahoma. Again, another toss-up game here. UConn, obviously the two-time defending champs, they had an up and down, pretty up and down season, but they still have a few good players that were on that championship team from last year, including Caravan, Diarra, Johnson. You know, there's not many coaches who can prepare for the tournament like Danny Hurley, as we've seen. And then on the other hand, you've got Oklahoma, who I think benefited from being in such a strong conference. I mean, they finished 13th in the SEC and still made it into the NCAA tournament. But they, do have Jeremiah Fears and Jalen Moore, who are, really good players. But I give the nod to the Huskies in this one, which will set up a nice, nice second round matchup between two schools who know what it's like to win back-to-back national championships. There's a nugget for you. So moving on, now we got Memphis and Colorado State in another 5-12 matchup. So Memphis won the American regular season and then beat UAB in the American championship. And they won 16 out of their last 17 games, so they're on a roll. PJ Haggerty is a really good player, averages I think nearly 22 points a game, and they have big man Dane Danger down low, who's a force. But I have heard that transfer guard Tyrese Hunter, who is their third leading scorer, is out. And the last I saw, I think this morning, Penny Hardaway said he doesn't know what the situation is. So, that's not good. On the other hand, Colorado State, who was basically on the outside looking in before running off 10 wins in a row and winning the Mountain West tournament behind lead guard Nick Clifford, who won Mountain West tournament MVP. And I watched Memphis a couple weeks ago, and that I believe was with Tyrese Hunter, and I mean I wasn't really that impressed. So I say Colorado State keeps the winning streak going here. Next up, we got Maryland and Grand Canyon. Maryland, another weird team. They finished second in the Big Ten, and I think I heard someone say they have the highest scoring starting five in the country. And I mean, whether or not that's a good thing remains to be seen. They do have freshman center Derek Queen, who he is legit, and he leads them in scoring and rebounds. And I think he won Big Ten Freshman of the Year. And then guards Gillespie and Rice can really score. I think Rice hit like 7 threes in their win over Illinois. I think in the Big Ten. I think it was in the Big Ten quarterfinal. But I also really like Grand Canyon, and they were in this pretty much this exact same spot last year, except they were a 12 seed instead of a 13 seed. But they won the WAC again behind Bryce Drew, head coach Bryce Drew, as well as NBA level guard Tyon Grant Foster, who was a breakout player in the tournament last year, and then Jacoby Cole. He leads them in scoring, and he was actually a transfer from TCU. They have Ray Harrison also, who was on last year's team. And yeah, I mean, I went back and forth on this one, but I think I like Grand Canyon to pull the upset here again. Let's see. So next up, Missouri Drake. I can already tell that Drake is going to be a pretty popular upset pick from what it sounds like, and they showed the statistics on these different matchups. And since 2018, 11 seeds are 12-12 against 6 seeds. So 500 record, which is it's crazy to me. I mean, I would think it would be close, but for it to be 500 over 6 years, that's crazy. I do like this Missouri team. They finished 8th in the SEC, and they had wins over Alabama and Florida, which, obviously not many teams can say that this year. I like their head coach, Dennis Gates. And I forget which game it was. I think it was maybe against Alabama, where um, at the end, they had the lead, and I think with like whatever it was, like 10 seconds left, a timeout was called, and he went over to the press box, and they grabbed a mic, went over the loudspeaker to the crowd and said, please, please do not storm the court. Please do not storm the court. Basically, just because I think the SEC is cracking down on court storming and fines and all that stuff. So, um, trying to avoid that situation, which they did listen, for the most part. Um, I was concerned when I found out Mark Mitchell didn't play in their last game because of injury, but it sounds like he's going to be back for this tournament. He plays, he's a big forward. Transfer from, I think he was also a transfer from Duke. They also have Caleb Grill, who he can really shoot. He's got range. Tamar Bates can do a little bit of everything. Drake was 30-3 and won the Missouri Valley tournament. And so I think, obviously why they're garnering attention as being a pretty popular upset pick. And they have the Missouri Valley Player of the Year in Bennett Sturts. But I don't know. I mean, I watched them play. I think it was like Bradley. I forget who they played in their conference final. I don't know. Wasn't that impressed. So I'm going to stick with the SEC team here. I mean, we've already kind of blown this bracket up a little bit, so I'll stay with the 6 seed. Now, Texas Tech and UNC Wilmington. I do really like this Texas Tech team. They have JT Toppin, who transferred over from New Mexico, and he's a beast. In fact, he was I think he won Big 12 Player of the Year and Big 12 Newcomer of the Year, which, I mean, makes sense. If you're a newcomer and you win Player of the Year, you're going to win Newcomer of the Year, most likely. They also have Darian Williams and Chance McMillan, who I think is the nation's leading three-point shooter. The problem is health, again. Apparently Darian Williams and McMillan are both injured. And they were interviewing Grant McCaslin, the head coach, on CBS yesterday, and he basically said, I expect them to play, but how much they're going to be able to play remains to be seen. So, not ideal, but I still really like this team. They finished second in the Big 12 and are 7th overall in Ken Palm, 6th in offensive efficiency. 100% or not, I think, they should easily get by UNC Wilmington here. Next up, we got the Battle of the Hall of Fame coaches. You got Bill Self on one side and John Calipari on the other. Kansas has kind of had a weird year, which surprised me because, Hunter Dickinson came back along with DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams, all from last year's team. Transfer from Wisconsin, AJ Storr, who was really good with Wisconsin last year. I think he might have been their leading scorer. And I thought he was going to be really good, but wasn't much of a factor. But it may just be because they also brought in Zeke Mayo, which I forget where he came from, but he probably took the AJ Storr role, and that's probably why AJ Storr didn't do a whole lot. But on the other hand, Arkansas also had a little bit of a down year. I mean, they finished 12th in the SEC, but they have a lot of talent with Fierro, Wagner, Ivisic, who all came over from Kentucky with Calipari, and then transfers John L. Davis, from Florida Atlantic and Jonas Adu from Tennessee. They had Trevin Brazil, who was a versatile big man that was already at Arkansas. And then I learned like yesterday that their star freshman Boogie Fland, who was injured, and I thought he was out like for the season, but apparently is back practicing and will play in the tournament. So I think coming off a year where Calipari had just a brutal first round loss with Kentucky last year, and everything, obviously blew up after that. I think there's some retribution here, and I think he gets the win over Bill Self. We got St. John's, winners of the Big East regular season and Big East tournament behind Rick Pitino. Who, basically he came out and said that I'm not recruiting freshmen anymore. I only want grown, experienced players from the portal, which, I mean, you know, you got to do what you got to do. I mean, clearly we've seen that, freshmen can struggle in the NCAA tournament. Take Kentucky, last year's Kentucky team, as an example. And Patino said, no, I want experienced, mature players that have been through, you know, adversity, and that's how I want to build my team. So, you know, the big two here for St. John's is R.J. Lewis Jr. He was the Big East Player of the Year, and then Zuby Ejiofor, their big man, Kadari Richmond, who can do a little of everything. I think he was a transfer from Seton Hall, I want to say. Um, I'm not completely sold on them, but I mean, they just keep winning. Like they've won 19 of their last 20 games. They're rated the best defensive efficiency team by Ken Palm, but only 65th in offense, which is average, maybe slightly, good, not great. But, they're tough, physical, obviously, you know, they take that from Patino, and Patino knows how to prepare for and win in the tournament. So no issues here with Omaha. Now we go up to the East region. We got the Dukies, the Duke Blue Devils, the #1 seed. Obviously, the main question mark here for Duke is the health of Cooper Flagg, the star freshman who was injured, I believe, in the quarterfinal of the ACC tournament last week. Turned his ankle, but they said he will be available for the tournament. I mean, it remains to be seen how healthy and I think he is the key to this whole offense. Now, they did win the ACC tournament without him. And, they have Colin Kneppel, another freshman who, I think is a really good player, as well as Tyrese Proctor, who's a veteran. He can score. And Sion James was a transfer. He's another tough physical guard. I don't think the committee did Duke any favors, with their region, giving them Alabama as the 2, Wisconsin as the 3, and then Arizona as the 4. I mean, even Oregon as the 5, I think is tough. But yeah, I mean, Cooper Flagg or not, no issues here with American or Mount St. Mary's. Now, Mississippi State versus Baylor, obviously could go either way. Mississippi State benefited, I think, from the strength of the SEC. They finished 9th in the conference and, hasn't really played well recently. Point guard Josh Hubbard, I mean, I think he's only like 5'11", but man, is he fast, and he can shoot from anywhere on the floor. So he can really fill it up. And on the other hand, Baylor, they have like 5 guards that can score between Wright and Roach and Nunn, Love, and then freshman who I think is going to be a lottery pick in VJ Edgecombe. Now they are without Josh Ojonwuna, who suffered a season-ending knee injury, and I don't think they've really been the same without him. But I think Norchad Omier, transfer from Miami, he leads them in scoring, and I think he's the difference in this one. So give me Baylor in a close one. Oregon versus Liberty. I think this could be another trendy upset pick. I don't know a whole lot about Liberty, aside from the fact that they've basically been they've been good, the last 3 or 4 years, and I feel like they've made the tournament every year, and give teams issues. Um, and from what I've watched from Oregon, I mean, I didn't think they were that good. But again, I mean, Dane Altman always has his teams playing well in the tournament. And they change their defenses in game, which obviously is critical to winning games, and I think can really you know mess teams up offensively. So no upset here. I'm taking the Ducks. Arizona versus Akron. I was big on Arizona last year, and they let me down pretty hard by losing to Clemson in the Sweet 16. Um, Caleb Love still leads the Fighting Tommy Lloyds, as well as Jaden Bradley and KJ Lewis, who were also on that team last year, and then Henry Visar and Toby Awaka, newcomers down low that give them a lot of size, and then Trey Townsend, Anthony Delorso, Carter Bryant, all wing players that give them options. So this is a pretty deep team, and I feel like down the stretch in the Big 12, they were playing some better basketball. Um, I've been meaning to watch Akron's win in the MAC tournament championship and just haven't yet. But either way, I'm going to stick with Arizona here for a nice little foes of old in the little Pac-12 former Pac-12 rivalry here in the second round. So next up, we got BYU and VCU. Now, I mean this matchup scares me a bit because I like BYU and I've seen a bunch of their games recently, but I feel like all I've been seeing and hearing is people taking VCU in the upset. And I feel like this is just one of those typical games where, you know, you like the 6 seed, but the 11 seed is just that trendy school. And, obviously VCU has history in March Madness. Um, but I mean, BYU, they go 10 players deep. They can really score. Um, but VCU is 8th in the country in points allowed. And they have, Atlantic 10 Player of the Year and Max Shulga, who can really shoot and score. But I feel like in the tournament, offense typically trumps defense, especially when your offense is spread out across, 9 or 10 guys as opposed to just 3 or 4. So no trendy upset pick here. I'm gonna stick with BYU. Wisconsin and Montana. Wisconsin couldn't get it done in the Big Ten championship against Michigan, and I remember watching that game, and I feel like it was like 4 minutes to go in the first half, and it was like 19-19, and I was like, what the heck is going on here? Um, but you know, I like this team. Transfer John Tonje, who I think is a player to watch in this tournament. He can really score. He can really slash to the hoop. And then Blackwell is another great guard that can score. They have 2 7-footers in Stephen Crowell and Nolan Winter, who are versatile, and they can shoot the three. So no issues here with the Grizz. I'm going to take Wisconsin. Next up, we have St. Mary's and Vanderbilt. I watched St. Mary's in the WCC tournament final against Gonzaga, and wasn't really blown away by them. They there's a few key players that were on last year's team that are back, including Augustus Marciulionis, who was the WCC Player of the Year, and then Mitchell Saxon was the WCC Defensive Player of the Year. And then they had the newcomer of the year, Paulus Morauskas, and the sixth man of the year in Mikey Lewis. So, I mean, they basically swept the conference awards in the West Coast Conference. And on the other side, you had Vandy, who finished ninth in the SEC. Um, they come in losing their last three games, obviously not great. Although they do have wins over Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas A&M, and Missouri, who are all, you know, six-seeded teams or higher in this field. Um, you know, they have guards Jason Edward and Tyler Nickel, as well as AJ Hoggard, who was a Michigan State transfer. My instinct was to go with Vandy here, um, but I think I'm going to stay with St. Mary's. They didn't look great to close out the season, but I think Randy Bennett turns the ship around here. Um, Now we got two-seeded Alabama against 15 Robert Morris. I mean, this could be the region of injury because, like I said, Duke has the Cooper Flag, who's questionable with an injury, and now Alabama has Grant Nelson, who was key in their Final Four run last year, also questionable with an injury. But beyond Nelson, they have a lot of guys that could score, a lot of length, athleticism, and this is a team, like we saw last year, that loves to shoot the three ball. Um, Mark Sears is the engine that makes them go, but freshman LeBaron Philon, he's really tough. He can really play. And then, they have Chris Youngblood and Aiden Holloway who can really shoot from three. Jaron Stevenson and Mohamed Diabate are two more long, athletic, um, forwards that can shoot and drive. And then they got Clifford Omarui, who I believe was a transfer from Rutgers, who cleans it all up down low. So yeah, I mean they're tough, they're deep, they can really score. It's a blowout. I'm calling blowout city here on Roger Morris, even without Nelson. Excuse me, Robert Morris. Robert Morris. There we go. Okay, now down to the Midwest region. So we got Houston and SIUE. So yeah, I mean Kelvin Sampson, he does it again. They won the Big 12 regular season and the tournament. And I think it was Houston and Drake who are the only programs in the country with at least 25 wins the last 4 seasons, which is, I mean, it's crazy. Um, and, they have three really good guards, including Milos Uzan, who came over from, I think, Oklahoma, took over for Jamal Shed. Still have LJ Cryer, who came over from Baylor, Emmanuel Sharp. Those are both, elite shooters. I think they said Houston is the number one three-point field goal team in the nation based on percentage. And yeah, I mean, they play tough, physical, probably some of the best stretches of defense that I've seen this year. Now, Joe Tugler won Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. They still have Juwan Roberts, who keys the front court defense, although I don't know how healthy he is, so I'll have to monitor that. I think a team that could beat them is one that is elite offensively, where Houston just can't keep up on offense, or one that plays better at their game than they do. So we'll see if that happens, but no issues in round one. So Gonzaga versus Georgia. I feel like this is the first year in a long time where Gonzaga hasn't really been talked about at all. And yeah, I mean, here they are again in the tournament as an 8 seed, which is, lower than, I feel like they have been for a while. But, um, you know, this team is a lot like the team they had last year, like Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman, Grant Ike, Greg Huff. I mean, those are all contributors from last year's team that are back. And then they brought in Caleb Battle from Temple, um, who brings some toughness and swagger. And I think he was the difference in their game against St. Mary's in the WCC tournament final. Now Georgia is one of the few teams that has beaten Florida this year at home. Um, and Asa Newell is a stud, and I think he's projected to be a pretty high draft pick. But I think Gonzaga is just too solid, and I can't bet against Mark Few in the first round. So taking the Zags here. Clemson versus McNeese State. Um, Clemson finished second in the ACC and one of the few teams to beat Duke this year. They returned a few of the players from the team last year that went on to the Elite Eight, including Chase Hunter, Ian Shefflin, Chauncey Wiggins. They're top 25 in both offensive and defensive efficiency, so solid on both ends. I did watch McNeese State in the Southland Championship, and I mean, they look good, but I don't think as good as the team last year that a lot of people were jumping on, who ultimately lost their first round game. Um, but obviously, different year. But once again, I think McNeese State, I think has become a pretty trendy upset pick. But I think I'm going to stay with Clemson here. Um, I don't love Clemson, but they know how to win games, so no upset here. Um, so next up, we got Purdue and High Point. The Purdue earned a 4 seed coming off. As we know, they ran um, they ran through to the national championship game last year before losing at UConn. Point guard Braden Smith, he won a Big Ten Player of the Year. They still have Fletcher Lawyer, who can really shoot, big man. Trey Kaufman-Renn, who really developed this year in the wake of Zach Edey, who's now in the NBA. But beyond those three, I just feel like there's not a whole lot to the team. And yeah, I mean, just wasn't that impressed in watching them this year. Now, High Point, on the other hand, I've heard good things about. They finished 29-5, which was first in the Big South, coming into the tournament, winning 14 games in a row. Um, and this is another team that I've been meaning to watch their conference final game just to get a sense of them, and I just haven't been able to yet. My gut told me to stick with Purdue here, but you know what? Let's go with High Point pulling it off. High Point, yeah. Okay, so next up we have Illinois and the winner of Texas and Xavier, which that Texas Xavier game I believe will be tomorrow night, Wednesday night. Kind of been a strange year for Illinois, who started off ranked pretty high. I want to say like in the top 10. And I thought they were going to have a good year, but then they just kind of kept losing. They have a lot of talent, a lot of guys that can score. This Kasparis Yakuchonis, who's projected to be drafted, and then freshman Will Riley, who's really good. Kylan Boswell, I think he came over from Arizona. And Trey White, both of them can score. Xavier and Texas, on the other hand, I'm actually a little surprised that Texas made it in with as many losses as they had. I forget how many it was, but it's hard to fully pick this until actually seeing Texas and Xavier play on Wednesday and who actually wins that game. But in looking at Texas, they have some players like Trey Johnson, who's going to be a high draft pick. Arthur Kaluma is a forward who can do everything. Tremont Mark is a good shooter. And, Caden Shedrick used to be on Virginia, and he's been with Texas a couple years. He's an underrated big man down low. And then Xavier, Wasn't really too impressed by them this year. But they have Zach Fremantle is just kind of a stretch forward that can give a team problems, and Ryan Conwell can really score. Um, so yeah, I mean, right now, like I said, it depends on Wednesday night's outcome, but right now I'm leaning with the 11-6 upset just because I don't really know what I'm going to get from Illinois. So I'm going to take the 11 seed here. Now we got Kentucky and Troy. So obviously with Kentucky, the first year of Mark Pope taking over for John Calipari. In fact, I think they said there were no returning players from the Kentucky team last year that, as we know, lost in the first round. But he did well. He finished sixth in a pretty loaded SEC conference. They have a lot of guys that can score, including Otega Owe, who was their leading scorer. He came over, I think, from Oklahoma. Lamont Butler was a transfer from San Diego State, really good on ball defender, who was injured, but I believe he's supposed to be ready for the tournament. Um, I was pretty high on Kentucky about a month ago or so, but then I found out that they lost Jackson Robinson for the year, who was like their second leading scorer that could really shoot, and you know not completely out, but as far as like Elite Eight, Final Four contender, I think I'm out on them after that. Although they have a um, couple good big men down low, Amari Williams and Andrew Carr, who can both handle the ball and shoot. Um, so yeah, I mean too much firepower for Troy. Then we got UCLA versus Utah State. Um, UCLA, I think this was their first year in the Big Ten, finished fourth under Mick Cronin. They have wins over Michigan State, Wisconsin, Oregon. I think they beat Oregon twice, and they beat Gonzaga, just to name a few. Mixed teams are always good defensively. They have forward Tyler Bilodeau, who can do a little bit of everything. Although, again, I mean, like a lot of these teams, I mean, I watched a few of their games this season, and I just wasn't that impressed. Um, you know, Utah State had another great year. They finished third in the Mountain West, and returned a couple key players from last year's team, um, in Ian Martinez and Mason Falslev. That team last year obviously had great Azabor down low, but they were able to win a game in the tournament. Um, I think this will be another trendy upset pick, and my gut was to take Utah State just because of just because I don't think UCLA is that good. But I'm going to stick with UCLA here. I think they'll slow the game down, into a physical, grind it out kind of a game, and I think they'll prevail. And lastly, we got Tennessee and Wofford. So last year I was high on Tennessee. They were in this exact same spot in the bracket. I was high on them because they're always elite defensively, but they had an elite scorer in Dalton Connect last year, and then they made it to the Elite Eight, ultimately lost to Purdue, who, like I said, went on to the national championship game. This year I wasn't as high early on, but I'm a little bit more in on them now. They finished fourth in again, a loaded SEC conference. They have wins over Auburn, Alabama, and Florida, which they're probably the only team in the country that has did that, and that's probably three of your top six teams in the country basically. Um, Zakai Ziegler is still running the show. He was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. They brought in Chaz Lanier to replace Dalton Connect as kind of your wing scorer. He was not quite on that level offensively, as Dalton Connect, but has been really good and leads them in scoring almost 18 points a game. And I think he's a bit of a better defender than Connect was. Um, he won SEC Newcomer of the Year. They have Jordan Gainey is another guard who really stepped up, especially in their on their run to the SEC tournament final. Um, and so yeah, I mean, obviously, don't think Wofford will hang around for too long in this one. All right, so let's see. Back up to the top. We go back up to the South region. So we got Auburn up against Creighton. Um, again, I think Auburn still pretty um, sour on their first round exit from the tournament last year, and I think they just have way too much firepower and ability to score. So no issues here making it to the Sweet 16. So next up we have Texas A&M and Michigan in the 4-5 matchup. This is a tricky one because again, I'm not that high on Michigan, but again, I mean Texas A&M, they're tough, but they can struggle to score. Now, if their guards get on a hot streak and are making threes, I think they can beat a lot of teams. Uh, so I went back and forth on this one, but I think I'm gonna stick with Texas A&M, making it onto the Sweet 16. We scroll down, San Diego State or UNC versus Iowa State. This is an interesting one because again, I mean, I feel like one of these 11 seeds always makes a run pretty deep, like Sweet 16. And then on the other hand, you have Iowa State, like I mentioned, is missing, well, at least missing Keyshawn Gilbert, and I know Taman Lipsey was injured, but I think he's supposed to be back. Um, yeah, I could go either way here, I mean, it is hard to pick one of these teams when you don't even know who it's going to be. So let me just stay with Iowa State here. Um, Now we come down to New Mexico and Michigan State. Again, I mean Michigan State just so solid in everything that they do, and they play like they go 5 deep in their guards and like 4 deep in their big men, and just too sound in you know their offense and rebounding, fast break. Like I said, I mean they're not the best shooting team, um, but I think their fundamentals is what make compensates for that. So take them to the Sweet 16 here. We come down to the West region. Florida and UConn, man. Like I said, I mean you have your back-to-back national champions, and I think it was 06 and 07, I want to say. And then UConn, your 2023-2024 back-to-back national championship teams. That would be something, and I bet you that is something that that's something that crossed the minds of the committee when they put UConn here in this corner with Florida. But again, I mean Florida just playing like a machine right now. In fact, I think they're the closest thing that I've seen this year to UConn's team from last year. So move on Florida to the Sweet 16. This would be a nice little 12-13 if we got this. Both double-digit seed upsets. And, Grand Canyon, they won, like I said, they won their first game last year, but then they went up against Alabama, who was playing, as good as almost anyone. Well, maybe as good as anyone except for UConn, and couldn't get it done. This is a tricky one because again, I mean, Grand Canyon has a couple very high level scores in Grant Foster and Coles. And Colorado State, I mean, balanced, but I don't know if they're going to be able to match up with Grand Canyon physically. So let's go with Grand Canyon here, making it to the Sweet 16. I gotta bring one double digit seed. Yeah. I mean this. I got 1, 2, 3, 4 up here in the South region. So let's change it up a little bit. Um, so if I come down to Missouri and Texas Tech, again, this is a tough one because I really like this Texas Tech team. It's just a matter of how healthy they're going to be. Um, Missouri can really score, but can they defend? That's a pretty big question, and I think JT Toppin is going to give them some issues down low that they won't be able to answer. So we'll stay with Texas Tech here. Now, Arkansas and St. John's, man, the battle of two former Kentucky head coaches in John Calipari and Rick Pitino. Again, another little storyline that the committee gave us there, which I'm sure crossed their minds. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think St. John's just too solid, too good on defense, and again, the big two in R.J. Lewis and Ejiofor um, gives them enough to get it done here. See if we go up to the East. So yeah, I mean a lot of this now. If Cooper Flag is back, um, and Duke wins their opening game, which I don't think they'll have an issue with. They'll have to come back and play again 2 days later, which depending on the health of Cooper Flag, may or may not be an issue. But without Cooper Flag, they were able to get through North Carolina and Louisville in the ACC tournament. So I don't think Baylor has enough here to pull the upset. Again, Oregon, Arizona, a little Pac-12 rivalry here from the old Pac-12. Again, I mean, I'm not that impressed by Oregon, but I mean, Dana Altman just always has his teams playing well and playing, basically raising their level in the NCAA tournament. But I think Arizona playing too good recently. Like I think Caleb Love will go on a little bit of a run, and I think they have too many guys for Oregon, so I'm gonna take Arizona in this one. Now BYU, Wisconsin. Whew, man, I mean this is a tricky one because again, like I said, I was watching the Big Ten championship game against Michigan, and I was like, is anyone gonna make a shot here? Like, I think at one point Wisconsin was like 1 of 12 or 1 of 14 from three, and I think Tanjay was like 0 for his first 9 field goals or 11 field goals, something crazy. Um, and on the flip side is BYU. If BYU makes it to the second round, that is a team that can really score in bunches. So I think I like this Wisconsin team. I like John Tanjay. I think he has the potential to go on a run, um, but I just think Wisconsin's a little inconsistent. And again, I think offense trumps defense here, so I'll take BYU in a little 6-3 mini upset here. We come down to St. Mary's and Alabama. Again, I think Alabama is playing probably in the top 4 teams and playing as good as the top probably 4 teams in the country. Almost as good as they did lose to Florida on Saturday, but I think they're almost as good. I think they're too long, athletic, too deep for St. Mary's, so no issues in the second round here. We head down to the Midwest. So we got Houston and Gonzaga. That's an interesting matchup. Again, I think one of the keys is the health of Juwan Roberts. and if he's good along with their like I said, their three guards that they have, and they have Tugler down low. Um, shouldn't have any issues with Gonzaga in the second round. Just think they're too tough and physical, and I don't think Gonzaga has seen a defense like this all season long. So I think Houston gets by there. Now Clemson and High Point, that would be a nice little matchup. I think this is where the road ends for High Point. They celebrate off their. I think this is High Point's first NCAA tournament appearance, and so yeah, I mean to pull off a 13-4 upset, that would be pretty big celebration. But I think we come back down to earth here. I'm going to take Clemson to face off against Houston. We come down here. Texas, Xavier, or Kentucky. I think Kentucky just too good for either one of these teams. I think they have too many guys that can score. Even like I said, even without Jackson Robinson, I think they've still been playing very good basketball. And Lamont Butler is back, which will be key for their defense. So I'm going to take Kentucky, and then UCLA and Tennessee. Nice little defensive matchup. Like I said, I mean, Nick Cronin always runs a tough physical defense, same as Rick Barnes with Tennessee. I think Tennessee, though, a little too much offense. I think Chaz Lanier, gets hot. I think he could score 20 to, at least 20, 25 points. I think they'll take care of UCLA. All right, we go back up to the South region. So we got the regional semifinals here in the Sweet 16. Auburn, Texas A&M. Obviously a matchup of the SEC. I think Texas A&M is actually one of the teams that beat Auburn this year. But don't think they get it done here. I'm going to move on Auburn. I think could be a close game, but I think Auburn just too much offense for Texas A&M. Iowa State, Michigan State. This is where I think Iowa State's lack of depth a little bit comes to hurt them. I think Michigan State is too deep, too many guards. And if they get hot from three, I think they're very difficult to beat. So I'm going to take Michigan State. Come down here, Florida and Grand Canyon. Wow. I mean, could you imagine Grand Canyon playing to go to the Elite Eight? But no, I don't see it. I just think Florida playing too well. I think they've been able to win against a number of different styles, either low scoring games, high scoring games, whatever it is. I just think they're going to be very difficult to beat, and I think I don't think Grand Canyon can keep up with them. Texas Tech and St. John's. So this one I've gone back and forth on because again, I mean I'm not completely sold on St. John's, but it is Rick Pitino. They play great defense and they have two elite scorers, a guard and a big man. But I think with if Texas Tech makes it this far, another week off in between the second round and the Sweet 16 gives them a little bit more time to get healthy. I'm going to take Texas Tech with a little mini upset here. Moving on to take on Florida Gators. We go up to the East region. Same situation here with Cooper Flag. I mean, I think if Duke can make it to the second weekend, give Cooper a little bit more time to rest up and heal. I think that's gonna be a big factor in their game against Arizona, and I think that is the difference. Duke moves on against Arizona. I think especially their defense, which I think is one of the main differences this year versus last year, where they had the chance against NC State to go to the Final Four and lost. I think in big part to their defense, where this year, I think they're like top 5 or top 3 in defensive efficiency. So I think that's the difference here. Next up, we got BYU and Alabama, both teams that can really score really deep, but I think Alabama just too athletic, physical, long. I think Mark Sears is going to be the difference here, and maybe even Phylon, their freshman, with the late basket that puts them up, gets them the win over BYU. We come down to the Midwest. So we got Houston and Clemson. Again, I mean, you know, the way Houston plays defense is something that a lot of teams will have not seen before this season. Very difficult to prepare for. Again, a lot of it is based on, how healthy is Juwan Roberts, because Houston is not the most, it's not the deepest team. But I think their shooting ability between Cryer and Sharp and Uzan, I think that gives them the edge over Clemson. I think Shefflin down low, he is he is very tough and physical, but I think the big man will give him too many problems in the paint. So I'm going to take Houston here. We got Kentucky and Tennessee. I think this is where missing Jackson Robinson is going to hurt Kentucky. I think Tennessee, with Ziegler, again, late Chaz Lanier, it's very difficult to guard. This would be, and this is another all SEC matchup, and I'm not sure what the split was this year between Kentucky and Tennessee. Maybe they split 1-1, but let's see if I have it here. No, I don't have it here. Okay. But yeah, I mean, I think Tennessee is just going to be too much to get by Kentucky and move them on to play Houston in the conference or the regional final. We scroll back up. We got our regional final picks: Auburn and Michigan State. Man, and I mean, I've really gone back and forth on this one because I've seen a lot of people taking Michigan State in this game, and I haven't really understood why. And maybe it's just what I've been saying is that they're just so solid in everything they do, and they're so deep, and they have so many guys that can, so many guards that can score. And I mean, this Auburn team, I just kind of get a bad vibe from them. I don't know what I mean. I don't deny that they're great and that they deserve the number 1 overall seed, but I just don't get a good vibe from them. And I think Izzo, will have the game plan to run against them. That'll be good enough to beat them. So I'm going to go with the 2 seed here, Michigan State. Spartans moving on to the Final Four in San Antonio. Come down to the West again. Like I said, Florida, it just is on a roll right now, and I don't know if there is anybody, if they continue to play how they've been playing, basically the last month, or at least 3 weeks or so. I don't think anybody can beat them, at least not in this field. Not in this tournament setting. I'm going to take Florida over Texas Tech. I think the depth of Florida and their guards and their versatile big men, I think is the difference in this one. So we got Florida moving on. Let's go up to the East. I think this is where it ends for Duke. Similar to Florida, I think the depth of Alabama, their athleticism, and their ability to score. Now, like I said, Duke, very efficient on defense, one of the top in the country. But, I think Alabama, just with their, the number of guards they have that could shoot, their big men, the number of big men that they have, I think will give matchup problems for Duke, who isn't really that deep of a team, especially down low outside of Malawach, who's their freshman center. So I'm going to take Alabama here, the upset pick, another 2 seed. So we go down to the Midwest and our fourth and final regional final here. We got Houston and Tennessee. Another nice little defensive, matchup with defensive-minded coaches between Kelvin Sampson at Houston, Tennessee with Rick Barnes. Man, this is tough. I mean, I don't think I can send 3 SEC schools to the Final Four. Not that I'm, not going to pick Tennessee just because of that. But like I said, Houston's the #1 3-point shooting team in the country, and I think that gives them the slight nod here. I can see this being like a 67-65 kind of a game, like a game in the 60s, low-scoring game. And here we have it. So we got the Final Four in San Antonio, Texas. In fact, I was actually at the Final Four the last time it was in San Antonio at the Alamo Dome. It's a little fun fact. So let's see, on the left side here, we got Michigan State and Florida. I mean, again, Florida is a machine. I think it is just too difficult to stop them from doing what they want to do on offense. And, I mean, Michigan State, as solid as they are, they're just not the greatest shooting team. And I think up against a team like Florida, got to be able to shoot. So taking the Florida Gators, move on to the championship. Then over here, Alabama and Houston. Man, I mean, first of all, I think it'll be tough for both of these teams to get here. Both of these teams are dealing with injury. I think a lot of this will have to do with the health of Grant Nelson on the Alabama side, and then obviously, Juwan Roberts on the Houston side. But again, I mean, I think offense trumps defense here. Now, they have said this is Kelvin Sampson's, this is probably his best, one of, if not his best, offensive teams he has had at Houston. Houston always known to be, a great defensive team. That, people have been saying this is his best offensive team, which makes sense. I mean, if you're the #1 3-point shooting team in the country, you're probably pretty good on offense. But I think Alabama just too much for them. They do lack a little bit on defense, but if you are an elite scoring team, which Alabama is, I think you can make up for that. So I'm going to take Alabama here for another rematch with Florida, which I think this may be their fourth time either their third or fourth time playing. They played either once or twice in the regular season, and they played in the SEC tournament final. SEC tournament semifinal, where Florida kind of ran away from them a little bit. And I think it's the same result here. I mean, not a runaway, but I think Florida is just going to be too much. I just don't see anyone beating them. I just think the way they're playing and the depth that they have, and the fact that defense, on defense, I think it was a focus this year for the coach, and I think that's going to be the difference. I think they stop Alabama from doing quite what they want to do on offense, and I think Florida is just too much offensively. I don't think they can be stopped. So I'm going to take Florida Gators. First national championship since 2007, and Let's see, how many total points will be scored in the game as our tiebreaker? Let's see. I mean, pretty high scoring. I think their game last weekend was, or Saturday, was like 100 to 80 or something like that. I don't think it'll be quite that high. 100, so I can see, like, let's see, 174 points. That's pretty high, but these teams can both score. Um, let's see, we gotta hit these. There it is. Florida, our national championship winner, 2025. Like I said, I love doing this. It's the best time of year, and I can't wait for this thing to get started. Again, join um, my tournament challenge group on ESPN, Mooney Hoops Bracket Pool. And yeah, thanks again for tuning in and listening. Hopefully, some of this is helpful. And yeah, like, comment, and subscribe below. Let me know what you think of my picks. And it is showtime.